Have you ever heard the story of Robert Smalls? Born into slavery in Beaufort, South Carolina in 1839, Smalls's early life was anything but easy. His mother was enslaved by Henry McKee, and it's speculated that McKee might have been Robert's father. Growing up, Robert received better treatment than other slave children, possibly due to the suspected connection to the plantation owner. However, his mother, having endured the harsh realities of field labor, feared Robert wouldn't grasp the true horrors of slavery. To remedy this, she requested he work in the fields and witness the brutalities firsthand. The lesson worked. Experiencing the horrors of slavery up close stirred rebellious behavior in the young boy, leading to clashes with authority and multiple encounters with the Beaufort jail. His defiance worried his mother, who knew that a slave boy with too much pride and too little caution didn't tend to live long in the South. To protect him, she convinced McKee to send 12-year-old Robert to Charleston, where he was hired out as a laborer. His wages, minus a meager weekly dollar, were sent back to McKee. It was in Charleston that Robert found his first taste of the world beyond the plantation. He worked in a hotel, became a lamplighter, and eventually found his true passion, the sea. By his late teens, he had worked his way up through the maritime trades, learning everything there was to know about Charleston Harbor. He became a skilled rigger, sailmaker, and longshoreman. He memorized every inch of the waterways, every channel, every hidden danger. He wasn't just learning a trade, he was gathering the tools for his greatest escape. Robert Smalls was only 17 when he married Hannah Jones, who was enslaved by the Kingsman family but worked as a maid at a Charleston hotel. Despite the legal shackles of slavery, the two were able to live together and have 3 children, each a reason for Robert to fight even harder for a free future. Robert went to his wife's enslaver with an offer. He wanted to buy his wife and children outright. The cost? An impossible $800. Far beyond what an enslaved man could hope to gather. He had managed to save $100, but that wouldn't cut it. He needed another way. And so he began watching the Charleston Harbor with a different set of eyes. The city was occupied during the Civil War, and its ports were a tangled web of Confederate defenses and Union blockades. To many, these ships were just part of the war machine. To Robert, they were something else entirely, a glimmer of possibility. He couldn't buy his family's freedom on land, but he could take it by sea. He told Hannah to be ready. There would be no turning back when the moment came. That moment arrived with the CSS Planter, a Confederate military transport vessel. Robert Smalls had been assigned to steer the ship as the war raged around him. It wasn't just any ship. It carried dispatches and weapons and even laid mines for the Confederate Army. He piloted it through Charleston's rivers, harbor, and along the coasts of Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. The more he learned, the more he realized this wasn't just a job. It was his way out. Over time, he gained the trust of the planter's white officers, so much trust that they often left the ship in his hands overnight. Smalls saw his opening. In May 1862, he made his move. In the early hours of May 13, 1862, Robert Smalls and his crew put their daring escape plan into motion. The ship had been docked near the Confederate general's headquarters, and as usual, the 3 white officers left the ship to spend the night ashore. At 3 a.m., Robert, dressed in the captain's uniform and straw hat, with the Confederate flag still flying, expertly navigated the ship through Charleston Harbor, past 5 heavily armed Confederate forts. At each checkpoint, Smalls gave the exact signals the real captain would have, fooling every watchful eye along the shore. Along the way, he stopped to pick up his wife, children, and the families of his fellow crewmen. By 4:30 a.m., the planter slipped past Fort Sumter without raising a single alarm. Only when the ship was out of Confederate gun range did the alarm sound, but by then it was too late. Robert headed straight for the Union fleet, replacing the Confederate flag with a white sheet his wife had brought. A Union vessel nearly fired until a lookout spotted the makeshift surrender flag. Once safely aboard, Robert Smalls turned over the planter and its cargo, guns, ammunition, and most importantly, Confederate maps and codebooks. His extensive knowledge of Charleston's defenses proved invaluable to the Union, leading to key victories, including the capture of Coles Island. Union officers, including Admiral DuPont, were astounded by Smalls' intelligence and bravery, with one even declaring him superior to any who have come into our lines. At just 23 years old, Robert Smalls had not only won his freedom but had also changed the course of the war. After his daring escape, Robert Smalls quickly became a national hero, with newspapers across the North praising his courage and ingenuity. His actions weren't just symbolic, they had real rewards. Congress passed a bill granting Smalls and his crew prize money for delivering the planter to the Union. More than just a skilled sailor, Smalls used his newfound recognition to push for change. Traveling to Washington, D.C., he met with President Lincoln and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, urging them to allow black men to fight for the Union. His plea worked. Shortly after, Stanton authorized the enlistment of 5,000 African-American soldiers at Port Royal, marking a major step toward black participation in the war. Smalls continued serving the Union, first as a civilian pilot and later as an official member of the military. He took part in 17 major battles, piloting both the Planter and the Crusader. In April 1863, he was assigned to the ironclad USS Keokuk and participated in the attack on Fort Sumter. Later that year, during an intense skirmish, the white captain of the Planter abandoned the ship under fire. Smalls refused to surrender, knowing his black crewmen would likely be executed if captured. Instead, he took command and piloted the vessel to safety. For his bravery, he was promoted to captain, the first black man to command a U.S. military ship. After the war, Smalls returned to South Carolina and set his sights on building a better future. Despite starting the war, unable to read or write, he became literate in Philadelphia in 1864. He experienced firsthand the racism of the North when he was on the streets of Philadelphia. While riding a streetcar, he was ordered to give up his seat to a white passenger and move to the exposed overflow platform. Robert Smalls, a war hero who had risked everything for his country, refused to accept this humiliation. Instead of complying, he simply stepped off the car. His quiet but powerful act of defiance didn't go unnoticed. The humiliation of a heroic veteran helped fuel the debate that ultimately led Pennsylvania lawmakers to pass a bill integrating public transportation. Back home in Beaufort, Smalls made an even more astonishing move. He purchased the very house where he had once been a slave. The former owner later tried to reclaim it, but Smalls fought back in court and won, securing his place not just as a free man, but as a landowner in the very town where he had once been considered property. After the war, Robert Smalls turned his attention to business and education, determined to uplift his community. In 1866, he partnered with a Philadelphia businessman to open a store for freedmen in Beaufort. Understanding the importance of financial literacy, Smalls hired a teacher to educate him in business and finance. He also helped establish the Enterprise Railroad, an 18-mile, horse-drawn railway that connected Charleston's docks with inland depots. Remarkably, aside from one white director, the railroad's leadership was entirely African-American. Committed to empowering his people, Smalls co-owned and helped publish the Beaufort Southern Standard, a black-owned newspaper, and in 1872, he purchased a 2-story building, which he donated as a school for African-American children. Robert Smalls' leadership propelled him into politics, where he fought for education and civil rights. In 1868, he helped draft South Carolina's new constitution, pushing for free public schooling. That same year, he was elected to the state legislature and later the Senate, where he introduced the Homestead Act. By 1873, he was appointed lieutenant colonel of the South Carolina State Militia, rising to major general. His influence grew nationally when he won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, serving 5 terms. Robert Smalls passed away on February 23, 1915, but his legacy endures. His Beaufort home is a National Historic Landmark, and statues, schools, and in 2004, a U.S. Army vessel, the USAV Major General Robert Smalls, honor his name. Robert Smalls' life was an epic saga of defiance, brilliance, and unrelenting determination. His story and each of his achievements alone would have secured his place in history, but together, they forged the impressive legacy of a man who refused to be defined by the chains he was born into.